All of you are sociology or political science majors, so I want to start with some questions that I actually think you might have a little bit of challenge answering. What is sociology? And what is political science? I want you to take a moment to jot down a possible answer to these questions. Don't worry about it being perfect, and do not use the internet. But once you have this figured out or have at least an answer for it, unpause the video, come back, and we'll talk through it more. Okay, how'd you do? Did you do it? Do you need a hint? I'll give you a hint just in case. The reason that these two disciplines are so often found in the same department, which is the case at Tennessee Tech, is because they have so much in common with them that we might think of them as sibling disciplines, or at the very least as very close cousins. And if you do it right, it is possible to craft a definition that with only a slight wording change can actually work for both sociology and political science. Why don't you pause the video again and see if that helps you develop your definition any further. Come back once you have something a little bit new. Alright, time to finally give you an answer. And since I am a sociologist, I am going to start with defining sociology. Sociology is the study of social life. What do you think of that definition? Does it work for you? If you're thinking critically about it, it should leave you a little bit dissatisfied. And the reason for that dissatisfaction is because it really just begs another question. Okay, that's a cool definition, but then what is social life? Social life is the dynamic relationship between social systems and the people or individuals who participate in them. And if you think back to your intro course where you probably talked about the sociological imagination, that concept is pointing to one side of this definition: the ability to see the influence of social forces on our public and private lives. That is the sociological imagination. And we can do a slight edit to make this fit for political science also. Political science is the study of political life. And political life is the dynamic relationship between political, governmental, and legal systems and the people who participate in them. Now, social scientists generally ask two sets of questions about the world. We ask empirical questions. What do people do? How do social systems work? How do these systems and institutions impact our lives, and vice versa? We also ask theoretical questions. Why do people do what they do? Why and how do social systems work as they do? Why are some actions, whether by individuals or institutions, more impactful than others? And how will changes affect different parts of the social or political system? These questions are interrelated, and we'll talk a bit more about the theoretical questions in a couple of weeks, and part of your curriculum should include an entire class on political or social theory, but most of this semester will be devoted to how we go about asking and answering the empirical question. What is the difference between research and research? Well, little r research happens anytime we go out and learn something about the world. And this could take a lot of different forms. We might turn to the internet, books, asking someone who's knowledgeable on the topic. It's really what we do anytime we're trying to scratch an intellectual itch or curiosity and just learn something new about something. But big R research is a set of systematic approaches to collecting information, which we call data. Now, every scientific field has some commonly accepted and usually tried and true set of practices for doing research, and we refer to this set of practices as research methods. Research methods are often used to test or generate theories about the world. Theory and research often exist in tandem with each other. Descriptive or empirical questions connect with explanatory or theoretical questions. And we can think about this direction in two different approaches. One of those is deductive. So if we start from the theoretical side, we might take some theory about the world, generate a hypothesis, and then go out and collect observations or data to be able to confirm or refute that hypothesis. Or we might flip it the other direction and take an inductive approach,
where we've gathered a certain set of observations, and then we make generalizations about the patterns we see there, and from that we build some kind of theory about how the world works. And in either direction, it lends us into the other side, making this something of a research loop. So let's say we've taken an inductive approach, and we've developed some theories about the world, and now we want to go test whether or not those theories actually hold in other contexts, or how far they might extend. So we take a deductive approach from there, and we go and develop hypotheses to gather our data and confirm or refute it. And that leads us to thinking about other generalizations and patterns and building yet other theories or modifying theories that exist. Now, there are a few key hallmarks to research, and this is outlined in the first 2 chapters of your book. As noted, we want to connect in some way to a theory about the world. We are looking for regularities and patterns. In a related fashion, our focus is on aggregates, not on individuals. The N of one is not very useful. The N of many is. Everyone has a best friend's cousin's mom's boss who is the supposed exception to the rule. And that exceptional case might sometimes be interesting and sometimes even valid to explore. But ultimately, it is the broader aggregate trend that we are interested in. And let's also keep in mind that this supposed exception does not invalidate that broader trend. We often speak in terms of variables, and that will be particularly true this term as we are focusing on quantitative research. More generally, we might think of variables as concepts or phenomena of interest. But the idea is that we have some logical grouping of attributes that we want to explain, and we have some other logical grouping of attributes, or maybe several groupings, that we are using to help explain the first. More on this later, but I am hinting at dependent and independent variables here. So, what defines social research? Well, let's go back to our definitions. Simply put, it's research about social or political life. It lets us explore the relationship between social or political systems and individuals. So we might combine that to say that sociological research is a set of systematic practices for exploring or verifying some aspect of this relationship between social systems and individuals. And political science research is a set of systematic practices for exploring or verifying some aspect of the relationship between political legal systems and individuals. And that's what we're doing this semester, learning to use one set of those practices that help us better understand social and political life.
Which brings me to the final point of this video. The world of social research methods is very large, and we are only covering one piece of it. This semester we're going to be talking primarily about methods of data analysis, but the data we analyze have to come from somewhere. Next week, in the unit that I've called the theory of methods, we're going to be talking very briefly about the other side of that equation, data collection. But let's be real, data collection is a pretty significant topic as well. I used to teach an entire year-long course on research methods, and in the first semester we would primarily focus just on data collection and wouldn't even really turn much to analysis until we got into the spring. So just know that 2 videos is really not enough to do total justice to this area, but we've got to be able to draw the line somewhere and be able to focus on things that we can actually accomplish. There are lots of different approaches to data collection. Some of the more common methods include things like surveys, interviews, ethnographies, focus groups, content analysis, secondary data analysis, and even web scraping. And then there are some methods that kind of straddle the line between data collection and data analysis, such as comparative historical techniques and even social network analysis, which we will highlight briefly later in the term. That diverse list also suggests one other method of categorization that we should consider briefly. Most researchers tend to think about methods as falling into one of 2 types, quantitative or qualitative. Quantitative methods refer to things that you can count, that you can quantify. So numbers, counts, things of that nature that involve a lot of math, frankly. Qualitative methods generally are everything else. They're things that aren't easily countable, that aren't easily turned into numbers. They tend to be more descriptive, more textual. And if we return to this list of common methods of data collection, we can see that some of them tend to lend themselves to one side of that house or the other. Surveys tend to be fairly quantified. That's not always true, but I would say at least 3/4 of the time or better, they're usually questions that we are trying to turn into some kind of a number so that we can quantify certain outcomes, although it is possible to include open-ended questions that tend to be more qualitative. Interviews, focus groups, and ethnographies, on the other hand, tend to lend themselves to a more qualitative approach. Ethnographies in particular are almost exclusively qualitative in their scope. Content analysis can really go either way. In content analysis, you're looking at the artifacts that are left behind that people have created. And you can quantify that, you can do that in a qualitative manner. There's a lot of different directions that I've seen, really good directions for doing content analysis. Meanwhile, secondary data analysis, when we're drawing on sources that other people have put together, usually very large data sets, and web scraping, also usually very large data sets, kind of the inverse of ethnography, they tend to be almost exclusively quantitative. And part of that's just because you have such a large data set that really there's no other approach to handle it than statistical techniques. Now, we are focusing this semester on quantitative techniques, but please do not make the mistake of assuming that one approach is somehow better than another. It would be far more accurate to say that every methodological approach has things it's particularly suited towards, and some things that it's not well suited towards. There are strengths and weaknesses to every one of these approaches, and every one of the analytic techniques that we may explore as well. For example, the techniques we're going to cover this semester are particularly good at helping us to understand big picture trends, but they're not so good at helping us understand the mechanisms by which social phenomena may develop. If you wanted to explore that, ethnography or even interviews and focus groups would be an especially good way of tackling that question. Conversely, ethnography can tell us a whole lot of rich material about the nuances of social dynamics and how certain phenomena may happen or occur or change, but they're not so good at telling us big picture takeaways. So my point is that all of these different methods have their place, and they all tell us something useful and interesting about the social world. And some of the best projects I have ever seen are the ones that are what we might call mixed methods, where they rely on some combination of these approaches to help do what's called triangulate to better understand something about the social world.